Welcome to Navigate Now. This is the podcast where we discuss everything around people and places and how we navigate the built environment. So let's get started. Today's topic on this episode is signs of life, art, wayfinding, and the character of place. And I'm super excited to have two guests on today's episode from We the Seeds. Rikesh, really good to have you, and Helen. Maybe Rikesh, you could give us a bit of a heads up of what you do as an organisation and a little bit about yourself as well.
So I'm Rikesh. I'm creative director, founder, and artist at We the Seeds Public Arts Placemaking UK. And essentially, we're a public arts studio where we create public realm pieces of art, whether that be a mural, an art trail, or window art advertising for retail. We really try to just do our best to connect art with people and communities in the public realm.
So, kind of, how did you come about starting the business?
It's a funny story, really, because I started out as a designer, and I believe Helen is a designer as well. And that kind of side of visual communication really sparked my interest in art. I worked 1 year as a freelancer around when COVID happened, like painting murals on the side of a building, and then I didn't look back. Literally, it was the best thing for me in terms of getting positive, sustainable ideas out there, straight to frontline communities.
Love it. Perfect. And looking forward to having Helen on the episode as well. Helen, give us a bit of an introduction about yourself and kind of where you joined the journey.
Yes. So, hi, I'm Helen Dewhurst, and I work with Rekesh on creative strategy and kind of community engagement around the artworks. And I'm also an artist myself, originally a sculptor, and I also work in sound. In creating immersive installation-based projects. So multi-dimensional, I think, is my kind of approach. And I have a kind of social practice. So the whole social engagement around work and how they kind of amplify out into communities is really what piques my interest.
Yeah, I think that's something I'm really looking forward to having as part of this conversation, is how we kind of take that discipline and that professional experience of art and public placemaking, but then make sure that's relevant to the communities and adding to that character of the places that we get involved in. So, as always on this podcast, before we crack on with the conversation, we always like to find out a little bit about the person behind the podcast. So, Rekesh, anything that you find exciting, interesting about yourself that the listeners might just go, "Oh, that's cool"?
Well, first things first, I'm a British Indian, so it's like kind of been born in this country and rediscovering my heritage, and also at the same time kind of making my way through public art. It's not the most traditional kind of route for an Indian person. You usually see them as accountants and doctors, but it's been a great journey because it's allowed me to kind of be a bit of the, what do you call it, the white elephant, be a bit different. So I kind of like a bit more like mindful of my environment, and I host a community football game on the weekend. I've recently got an allotment, Helen knows, and it's been an interesting journey within creativity, and putting creativity first as I do things, and with creativity is community. So
that's what I love about this. Every guest that we have on this particular podcast brings a different dynamic, a different perspective, different set of experiences. Helen, anything from your side that kind of what the person behind the professional sculpting side of things?
I don't know. I quite often relate to forms and shapes. I have a thing about circles. I quite like circles. If you want something.
Cool. Love it. There's always different perspectives, and kind of look forward to having this conversation on this episode. So the first thing that I wanted to dig into a little bit and talk about was telling stories through art in our places. We can come up with the most amazing placemaking interventions, etc. But I think it's really important. I'm interested in how art and environmental graphics and placemaking in one dynamic can express a character of a place. And I'm sure we've all visited various places around the UK and around the world, and they all have a story to tell. So one question maybe to kick us off is, what makes a place feel like itself? how have you seen good examples, or maybe from projects that you've worked on, or conversations you have with your clients? How do you make a place feel like it's owned by that community and those people that frequent it?
I think it's quite interesting when you go into a place for the first time, and I think we always like to visit somewhere properly in person and walk about and feel and look and talk to people. And there's quite often things that jump out visually from a place. When we did some work in Chingford in East London, there was a definite sense of this heritage there, that the sense of it being set up in with this art. There were just art deco kind of little details set around in the environment, and they were just really key. And that ended up being something we really held on to.
I guess having that kind of in person is obviously critical in this world, in that sense. Are there any kind of, you mentioned obviously looking at the architecture and the ambiance and the environmental aspects of the place. I'm interested as well, like, how do we get you to kind of start chatting to people to get the deeper story about the place? Rikesh, anything else around that? Any kind of research methods that you use or study?
Yeah, I think to really start thinking about public realm artwork, or even just like, putting any intervention in the public realm, each personality, so each place has a personality of their own, that's kind of shaped through the history and heritage of an area, what they've been through, and that kind of builds on the character of the people that, and identity of the people that live there. So yeah, like for us, our initial stages of a project is really just speaking to people and hosting focus groups, researching the area. What makes, like, we did a project in Droitwich Spa, and the whole area is situated on brine pools. Romans used to come and extract brine from the ground and take that around the country, and around Europe. So
Yeah, there's these amazing salt paths, and all the names of salt in the area on different ways that map around that people used to move from that centre outwards was really key.
Thinking as you mentioned there about the Romans, like, I guess as we just start to unpick this conversation, it's like it's being an archaeologist in a sense, isn't it? It's taking that slow but purposeful way and approach to unpick and to discover the various layers. I guess that's what an archaeologist does, is they go through the layers of the story of that place. They're doing it through digging and that exploration phase in that sense. But we can do that, as you mentioned, through focus groups and clear, purposeful conversations to ensure that we get that level of information from that community. And I'm guessing we get then lots of unseen narratives that we can start to pull to the surface. Like, we did a project in South London, a place called Purley. And when we were looking at that and looking at what the brand means for that place, we start to discover that the word Purley has legacy and it means pear tree. So we can start to bring that story. And I think it's one thing is maybe an unsung discipline, maybe in placemaking, is unpicking what those stories are and not just going for the things that are on the surface that happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the things that we can quite easily research and find. It's about being the archaeologist, I guess, and digging underneath the surface to find those unseen narratives as well.
I think quite often there can be a real quality in a place as well. So particularly in Droitwich, when we were researching salt, and there's a lot of history and kind of almost quite well-known history, but then other types of history where salt, really, there was this underlying theme that came through that was about well-being in the area, and people kind of approaching it the whole way through history, like back to the Romans, back further, and all of these kind of chapters of history all evolved out of that focus. And our job really kind of ended up bringing that back up from the deep history of the place into the present, and helping people reconnect with that identity.
Yeah, no, I love that. So, do you have like a favorite example, maybe of a space that's been transformed by art, by culture, by storytelling? Because we go to a city, don't we, and we have that kind of preconceived idea. But as you said, it's nice to go to a place that's with fresh eyes. Any examples where you've seen places changed or maybe just tweaked by the use of art, culture, and storytelling?
I mean, a good example of that is the Grenfell project, actually, Helen. Um, do you want to say a little bit about the Grenfell project?
Yeah, so obviously in the wake of the tragedy of the Grenfell fire in West London, there's been a kind of ongoing memorial, publicly engaged art project around that, which has worked very closely with the local community in various ways, developing artworks in situ on site through largely mosaic pieces that exist at the site of the tower, and then expanding out into the community. And this evolved. It's with a largely led by an arts organisation that we're really inspired by their work, called Akava, and they've worked in a very detailed way with lots of different types of groups, and became this kind of central point for engagement with lots of different sectors of the community, and bringing them together in a really unique time, which was obviously a process of processing the trauma and the anger around the injustice of what happened in the tower, and the fire. And that whole piece has evolved actually into a walking tour called the Walking as One tour, which is essentially set on a route around the immediate location. And it's now a series of public art panels that are set into the pavement, and they mark the route around the tower, that ended up being a route that people used to walk in a sort of meditative but also demonstrative way. Every week, I think it occurred for the first few, at least, and I think now it runs monthly. But so people were walking as one along this route repetitively, and this artwork sort of evolved out of that process. And each of these are sort of statements around justice for these different sectors of the community.
I guess art in that sense has that unique, like any other discipline in placemaking. We've talked about lots of things on this podcast over the episodes around accessibility, around innovation and technology. But art, I guess, brings a unique perspective to pull in all of those strings that you mentioned around emotion, history, courage, all those aspects, and actually find them have a home, and to be like recognized, but also that reassuring aspect that we're able to process certain things that have gone on in a place. Lots of places celebrate great moments, say London at its Olympics, or Manchester when it had its Commonwealth Games, or areas that have tragedy, and processing them through art is often used in so many. I'm well outside of my remit now. When art is often used as a very key tool in that process of people's well-being, isn't it? And like nothing else.
Yeah, definitely. It's, you know what it is, like, we was in Droitwich Spa and we're painting a history and heritage mural for about 7 weeks. That's pretty much seven days a week, non-stop painting. And the amount of the members of the community that watch the artists and watch us putting the paint on the wall is for us and them. It's more than just us painting a piece of art. It's like almost like we're transferring our energy onto the wall, and through these communities communicating these powerful ideas, and art just happens to be the kind of like facilitator of, like, and it's extremely empathetic. It connects with people, and when people see that final kind of hand painted effect. People see that it's been crafted, it's artisan, it's handmade.
Yeah, I love that. So then, there's the question then maybe is, how would you approach a place that's struggling with its identity or it's disconnected from its community? Maybe that's a big question.
Yeah, I mean, it really involves kind of like looking at the past, and kind of taking a deep dive into the past and understanding where the community is now, their kind of pain points, and understanding the area as well. I know we kind of will touch on wayfinding a little bit later in the podcast, but like, what are the connection routes, like where the key areas that people dwell, what do they like to do, what kind of connects them together even at a time of turmoil. For example, we had a project in Wildstone, with, I don't know if you know, but it's like the old Kodak factory, and that closed down. It was a real centerpiece in the London Borough of Harrow, and even though the factory closed down, it was still talked about through our engagement workshops and the research that we did in the area, and we found out the community still kept that as part of their identity. And through the artwork, we wanted to showcase that, very creatively and colorfully, just as it's still alive to this day, and it's still kind of embedded within the fabric of the community as well.
I love that, and that's a perfect segue. Often, and we see it as we move around the UK and other parts of the world, that things get remembered by elements of history. So a roundabout might be named after, I'm thinking one particularly in South London, it's named after a business that was there, and it will always and forever be called the Lombard Roundabout. That building is long gone, or certain areas or certain people will name certain parts of their town, city, village after things that they remember. The former shop name, or the where the post office was, or where the bank was. Um, and that's maybe a nice segue into something else I wanted to talk about in this episode is the role of art and placemaking in wayfinding. And obviously at Claro, we come across those wayfinding challenges all the time. But I wanted to explore a little bit of how creative interventions can shape how people move and feel and find their way around a town, city, village, etc., etc. I'm really interested, kind of, Helen, to your perspective on sculpture and placemaking, creating landmarks. We always talk about landmarks when we're talking about wayfinding, whether it's inside a building or whether it's in the wider built environment or the open environment, say parks and open spaces. Because sculpture, landmarks play a really key way in wayfinding from a just navigation point of view, but put that level of your experience and expertise on top of that, they tell a story as well. So when can art help wayfinding, and when maybe can it, if it can, I don't know, could it hinder it?
I mean, I think there's a lovely example of, a very large emblematic sculpture that has really embedded into the landscape, which is the Angel of the North. It's this massive symbol, that's erected on the horizon as you reach the north, and it's this amazing encapsulation of the story of loss in the north. From industry, its wings outstretched, like all the airplane industry, the motor industry, and the mining. It's got there's a real kind of echo to it, and it speaks to communities of deep feeling, which is still very, very present, even now. And people orientate via it now as a kind of feature, and it brings meaning.
It's a landmark, it's sculpture, but it's also in that sense a destination in itself as well.
Yeah, it's a destination. It's somewhere where people will come, and I believe that there's lots of kind of mementos and elements that communities bring to it now as a site of destination and meaning making and ritual in different ways, which is really a really interesting evolution around a sculpture. And I'm really interested in that that kind of organic evolution of that sculpture can initiate in a place or in a landscape. I think sculptural trails, when they kind of are integrated into a community or into an urban space, can be really transformative. The creative the artwork interventions that have happened down in Folkestone. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with that public art trail there. Creative artworks, Folkestone's creative artworks, has been really, really transformative of a town that has got a lot of military history and deprivation, really. And it's introduced stories and a lot of playfulness into a space and given visitors an interesting new routes through to experience a town that they may not have visited or may not have explored in that way. So citing these artworks all around the town has really kind of introduced a new lease of life, I think, to it. And you mentioned wayfinding. There's actually some really funny, playful signs that are not signs as part of the trail. There is an artwork. I can't remember exactly who the artist is by, but it's a sign that is kind of leading you nowhere. So it's a non-functional sign, but it's just lovely to have that play as well around signage, or it doesn't have to be logistical necessarily.
Like, I think as a whole, it embodies humanness. Having these sculptures and public art interventions, it reminds people that a human has been here. If we look back to, let's say, early cave paintings, these were a visual kind of montage of humans saying that I was here. Please remember me. This is my place. This is what I've done. This was the things that I cared about, my family, my livestock, etc., etc. So essentially, these become almost totems of humanness, people's thoughts, and captures themselves, their lives.
Because if we look at kind of a very matter-of-fact approach to navigation, to wayfinding, we could take something like in the UK, the old A to Z map, which is very matter-of-fact. It gives you factual information about roads and layouts and destinations and towns and locations, but it says you nothing of the character of the place. And I think that wayfinding should have a blend. It should be functional. It should be accessible, legible, consistent, and all the other things that we talk about on this podcast. But I really love it when a wayfinding intervention of whatever degree that is starts to find itself at home in that place. So it's not some teleported A to Z map that's the same in every part of the whole of the UK. It is actually relevant to tell the story, to whether it's material use, whether it's telling a bit of architecture, representing history. It should actually feel as though it's part of that actual environment. And as we talked about in the community, in its owned. And I love the example of the Angel of the North, because it's been taken on board and loved and seen then as an emblem and as a symbol of that part of the UK and its identity, which is amazing.
I mean, there's a lovely series of artworks through Folkestone which make a nod to its history of its fishing history, and the fact that the fishing industry there it's not as present as it was, but there's a real sense of deep identity, and that being what the town sprung up around, and boats. And there's a series of these golden boats that are sort of set on different signposts, and the whole way through it's a little golden fleet of fishing boats that goes through the town, and it's really beautiful.
If we're discussing the balance between, on one extreme we've got the A to Z map of pure function, and we've got the beautifulness of sculpture and art and experience from that side of the dynamic. And I don't know necessarily the perfect answer to this, but what would be that balance between aesthetic appearance and functional clarity? Because I love the example, Helen, about the sign that goes to nowhere. I just love that. It's more on the aesthetic and the experience than the function, the clarity. But is there a balance that we can strike as people that are custodians of places? Because I often use that term on this podcast. We are custodians of places because we might not own that place. We might manage part of it for a period of time. And as we've talked about legacy and generations in history, we are just looking after our places for our generation, celebrating on the past and making it relevant to the current. But is there a balance that we can strike there between art and the aesthetic side and the function, the clarity of what the project or the intervention is there to deliver?
Do you know what? Where I love this question because there definitely is a balance, and we at We the Seeds try to make street art as functional as possible. That meaning serving a purpose. It's not just a pretty picture. It's something of meaning, of identity, of place. It's something of wayfinding. It's all of these things that kind of have ties to the deeper kind of human connection. Um, so yeah, like I definitely do think there's a balance to be found. I think a lot of the side with the aesthetic is like, what styles and what mediums can best communicate those ideas better and stronger, or more visually, or more colorfully, or more essentially more clearly as well. So there definitely is a balance to be found with the types of mediums and aesthetics we're using, plus on the key messaging of that piece.
Cool. Anything else you want to bring in there, Helen, around kind of from your experience around kind of getting a brief from a place and balancing those two dynamics of being a creative at heart, but also looking to serve an end goal for a town centre manager, for argument's sake?
I mean, I think coming into a place and designing something that's going to enable new and fresh experiences is a lovely opportunity to imagine different ways of helping people discover new things in the area. I think there's an element where people actually need to find the things. But there's a real magic in having the opportunity to create something that is discovering treasures, or is like a treasure hunt. Or
sometimes I always say wayfinding has got to do with two things, two Ds. It's about destination. I need to get from A to B. Just take me to the train station. Or it's about discovery alongside destination. I'm in a city and it's lunchtime. Where's the best coffee shop? Where's the best cafe? And that, I guess, historic cities are great for that. And also a challenge from a wayfinding perspective, because there's little narrow lanes that you will just go past the main street and you just never find them. So I think art and placemaking, it's got a very clear dynamic to help that and to facilitate that and tell those stories. But maybe that's a segue into the third thing I wanted to pick up on this episode, is how we make places that people have great experience within. So how do we create places that people actually connect with? Places that spark that sense of pride, that sense of this is my town, this is my city, that feel personal, that create that maybe that lasting impression that you go away from that place and you communicate that story. You say, hey, I went here and I found out about that, and you should go there too. I discovered a great cafe, or that great bit of history. I never knew something about that city before. How do we create those types of experiences in those kind of places? Can art drive placemaking and that place pride and that belonging to create distinction from your city to my city?
I mean, we worked on a project up in Chingford Mount, and that whole project was really an opportunity to help people reconnect with the high street and to give an identity to that place that that had been lost somehow, and lost in various ways. And our connection into the community really dug into a sense of lots of things having been lost, down to the fact there wasn't even a local bank that local people could go to get some cash out anymore. I mean, it's in decline in lots of ways, and the community was really feeling that intently. So to work with that space, we created a map of the area that enabled people to experience it in different ways. So they had an interactive virtual map that enabled them to have a kind of prior experience of the space that enabled a sense of safety and experimentation and discovery and route planning even before they kind of entered the real space. And then we worked with the high street and the local community to engage local people in a more playful way, and set up a whole series of window art. It was a kind of a game that worked along the windows of all the high street that local people could engage with in different ways, and they could discover little secrets and fun little things to do and discover stories about one another. So it helped really kind of create more interconnection between people in a not very expensive way, really. Like, it was a real kind of just, let's play with the space and get people to kind of think differently and just try and reconnect to each other a little bit more in a context which was kind of post-COVID, everyone feeling very isolated and kind of socially anxious, to try and create a bit more cohesion.
It's really good. No, yeah, definitely. I think that's opened up one question into my mind, which I wanted to ask before the episode's out, so I'll ask it now. I speak to lots of people who turn into managers, place custodians, and they talk about getting the community involved in a project. And I always want to make sure place custodians go away from every episode with some key nuggets of information. If someone's looking to engage a community into creating art and that kind of thing, what top tips would you give them, and how would you like them to direct that? Obviously, they can come and talk to yourselves, and we'll get your details at the end of the episode and a bit more how you help clients. But what top tips would we give to these types of individuals that are looking to engage the community in that creation process of art?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it's about really understanding that the arts can be used to connect different demographics and different ages, and it's really that tool that has no boundaries. And let's say something like an initial creative workshop, something that's hands-on and that kind of like everyone can kind of pick up and be part of, works really well, because using that data, let's say, for example, they're writing their memories down, or they're sharing stories about the local area or what they would like to see in future artwork or developments or whatever it might be in the area. That data from having that conversation in a very playful way becomes very encouraging and very empowering, especially for people that have a lot of key says around these places that being built and the built environment. So yeah, it's like, for us, it's like creating a real kind of playful, hands-on, inclusive approach that everyone can be a part of, but then at the same time kind of pulls key ideas, and it inspires and opens up that conversation to much more, because it is like a lot of it is interconnected.
Definitely. And I'm super enjoying this conversation. Maybe kind of one thing to kind of wrap us up, as it were, was how do we make sure when we're developing an arts project that we make it's memorable and brings ownership and is unique without being gimmicky?
I think the key thing really is investment, really investing time in digging deep into a place and not skimming over the surface. I think that time and process is really where the value comes, and for the processes to be designed to be open enough to be able to evolve with what is discovered in that process. So I think designing a process that has got a certain amount of looseness enables that creativity to really respond genuinely to a place, as opposed to coming in and defining it all ahead of time. It allows it to evolve and for that energy to flow out from the bottom up.
Yeah, I think we're all very conscious when we go into a place, aren't we, that we're in someone else's home. In that sense, we're in their community, in their backyard, down their street, in their town, and their city. And it's important that everything that we do as placemakers enhances that, rather than add layers that are not necessary to it. It's important that we have that listening ear before we start to look at all the professional experience and wonders that we can bring to a scheme and to a project and to a place. Is ensuring that it's their place and their place that they take ownership of. So maybe, just as we wrap up, maybe what would be one thing that you would like place custodian Rekesh to, and then we'll come to you, Helen, to take away from this episode, of one thing that they can then look into, can go out onto the high street, into the town, into the city, and go, yeah, I need to look at this.
Well, here at We the Seeds, we're really big on the engagement side of things. I think the engagement is just as important, and the initial community engagement is just as important as the final public art outcome. And the whole investment process of getting, residents and tourists both invested in that piece of public art is really through it being co-created by the local community in some way, shape, or form. Whether that be through a workshop process, or we created a giant town centre birthday card sculpture the other month. So just getting people interacting and engaging with a small part of something arts and creativity focus, so that their insights and memories and stories can then be embedded into something which is essentially encompassing the history and heritage of an area, and inspiring for the future as well.
Love it. Helen, anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think we're always motivated by this kind of universal idea of everyone being creative, and we work really hard to help people really experience that and believe that everyone has that creative potential. And I think really, if you believe in that really wholeheartedly, then it really enables that to flow through from the people that come on board and along the journey with different projects.
I've loved this conversation, and I'm sure those that are listening to this episode will get a lot of quality information out of that as well. But just as we wrap up, if people want to find out more about you guys, Rikesh, where do we find out more about you guys?
Sure, yeah. Best thing is to follow us on social media. We're at wetheseeds.agency over on Instagram, We The Seeds Agency on Facebook, We The Seeds on TikTok, or check out our website over at www.wetheseeds.co.uk.
And what I'll do is I'll make sure all of that information is in the description of this particular episode. So feel free to reach out to Rikesh, to Helen, to find out a little bit more of what they do. Follow them because they do some super cool stuff. Their socials are awesome. So go give them a follow and a like. And thank you very much, both of you, for taking the time out of your day and sharing your experiences and educating the audience of the podcast of Navigate Now. And we're super looking forward to continuing that conversation another time. Thank you for joining this episode of Navigate Now. I've been your host, John Doxey, and we're delighted that you've joined us on this episode of the podcast. If you want to continue this conversation and find more about people and places, feel free to like and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify so we together can continue this conversation.